It was one of those mornings when the air feels heavy with secrets, and the forest seems to whisper things only the brave or the broken can hear. Aiden Brody, tucked away in his solitary cabin in the Adirondacks, had long stopped expecting company. He had walked away from the noise of the world years ago, chasing peace, or maybe running from it. But peace has a funny way of arriving wrapped in chaos. When he opened his door just after sunrise, expecting nothing more than fog and pine, what he saw stopped him cold. There, towering and motionless, was a black bear. And not just any bear, a mother. In her jaws hung what looked like a lifeless cub. At first glance, fear took over. His instinct screamed what any man's would. Close the door, grab the rifle, don't make a sound. But there was something strange in her eyes, something far removed from menace. It wasn't the wild rage of a cornered animal or the cold gaze of a predator. It was grief, a silent ache, deep and raw, pouring from her without a single sound. This wasn't an intruder. This wasn't a threat. This was a mother who had nothing left but hope, and even though it was hanging by a thread. Rescue animals rarely ask for help. But sometimes, when the world turns dark enough, even the wild crosses boundaries. Aiden stood frozen. A lifetime of skepticism warred with something deeper, something instinctual. He'd written about pet heroes, animal rescue stories, even pet survival stories during his days as a journalist, but nothing prepared him for this. This wasn't a headline. This was a moment no one would ever believe unless they lived it. The bear didn't move, didn't growl. She simply stared, her chest rising and falling slowly, her pain echoing through the morning mist. And still, the cub hung limp. For Aiden, every heartbeat felt like a choice. Step back into safety or step forward into something that might just change everything. He took a half step outside, the wood of the porch cold beneath his bare feet. His hand hovered near the doorframe, but his eyes never left the bear. The tension was electric, but not dangerous. It was the kind of energy that says, "This matters. Don't mess it up." In the stillness between them, something unspoken passed. Aiden wasn't sure if it was courage or madness that nudged him closer, but either way, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not from her. Stray animals, yes, even wild ones, sometimes carry within them a desperation that tugs at the very soul of humanity. And just as quickly as she had appeared, the moment shifted. The bear stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the weight of the world in every movement. She bent her neck low and gently placed the cub on the wooden planks of Aiden's porch. Then she backed away, still watching, still hoping. The cub didn't stir, not a twitch, but something told Aiden this wasn't over. No, this was the beginning, a tale not just of survival, but of animal miracles. And deep in his gut, he sensed that the line between human and animal was about to blur in the most unexpected way. Aiden stood there, barely breathing, as the great bear lowered her head and gently nudged the cub toward him, as if offering it into his care. There was no roar, no defensive posturing, just a soft exhale and eyes clouded with a kind of sadness that doesn't need translation. He expected a wild animal to be unpredictable, even volatile. But this mother, she was composed, almost reverent. It was a moment pulled straight from a dream, or perhaps a lesson disguised as reality. Emotional pet stories often talk about connection beyond words. This was that, but primal, raw, and etched into the silence between heartbeats. He reached for the rifle mounted above his fireplace. Habit, not intention. It had been years since he'd needed it, but old instincts die hard. Then he hesitated. What was he protecting himself from? A mother who brought her baby to his door? No, this wasn't a threat. This was trust, naked and vulnerable. He turned away from the weapon and opened the door wide instead. And in doing so, opened something deeper inside himself. The kind of opening that only happens when the walls you've built get dismantled by compassion. Brick by silent brick. Crouching low, Aiden inched toward the cub, careful not to startle the bear. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. When he reached the tiny body, he paused. There, beneath the fur barely rising and falling, was a whisper of life. A flicker, a spark. The baby wasn't gone yet. His heart thudded. It reminded him of those pet survival stories he'd once reported on, the ones where all odds were stacked against survival. But something unseen kept beating within. Something stubborn, something sacred. He scooped the cub up with the tenderness of someone handling glass. It was lighter than he expected. Fragile. The fur was matted, and the body was limp, but that faint breath, it was everything. As he turned toward the cabin, the mother bear didn't move. Not a muscle. She simply sat, breathing slowly, her massive form silhouetted by the soft light creeping through the trees. She wasn't just watching, she was waiting, believing, as if she knew this man, this former storyteller, this lonely soul, was her last and only hope. Inside, Aiden moved with quiet urgency. He laid the cub on an old wool blanket, wrapped it tight, and placed it near the fireplace. He whispered to it, nonsense words and gentle sounds, anything to make it feel less alone. The silence outside remained unbroken. The bear's presence was like a shadow stitched to the forest edge, constant and unyielding. And deep down, Aiden knew something ancient had just happened. Not the kind of thing people post about. This was different. This was legacy. And like many animal rescue stories, it was far from over. "I'll try to help," Aiden murmured, more to himself than to the massive creature just yards away. But somehow, it felt like she understood. She didn't flinch, didn't growl. She just watched him carry her baby inside, as if that fragile thread of trust stretched from the depths of her primal instincts straight into the worn, quiet heart of a man who hadn't trusted himself in years. This wasn't just about a cub. It was about two beings, wild and weary, meeting in the middle of desperation. Like animal miracles aren't miracles at all, but fragile bridges between broken hearts. Inside the cabin, Aiden moved with a focused grace he hadn't felt in ages. He laid the cub down gently, wrapping it in soft towels and surrounding it with warm water bottles, improvising with the precision of someone who's got everything to lose. The heating pad hummed beneath it, casting a faint glow. And still, the mother bear waited by the window, like a stone guardian of ancient stories. She didn't pace, didn't roar. Her patience spoke louder than any scream. It was an unspoken pact. "I trust you. Don't fail him." Minutes turned into slow, aching hours, the kind where each breath feels like a negotiation. Aiden sat close, barely blinking, watching the cub's tiny chest rise and fall, slowly but steadily. He had seen rescue animals come back from the brink before, but this was different. This wasn't just a survival story. It was a spiritual test, a quiet kind of heroism where no one's watching, and yet everything depends on how you show up in that invisible moment. And still, the mother bear didn't move. It was as if she knew the line between life and death ran right through the middle of that little cabin, and she chose to believe. Aiden couldn't remember the last time someone had trusted him like that. It shook him, changed him. Maybe that's the thing about heroic pets and animal rescue stories. They remind us that love doesn't need a common language. It just needs presence, and maybe a little bit of warmth and a lot of stubborn hope. As the cub's breathing began to even out, Aiden felt something shift, not just in the room, but inside himself. This wasn't about playing savior. This was about answering a call from the wild that didn't need words. It was about showing up when it matters most. And in that silence, thick with snow and secrets, he realized this wasn't the climax. No, this was only the beginning of the fight. Aiden had been a lot of things in life: a war correspondent, a dropout, a man running from shadows, but never had he played the role of healer. Yet here he was, bent over a fragile wild cub, inspecting what looked like a crusted bite wound and a leg bent at an unnatural angle. This wasn't just a scratch. It was a race against time. Infection had already started its quiet work, and without help, the cub wouldn't last till nightfall. The weight of that truth hit him like winter wind. In pet survival stories, there's always that turning point, the desperate choice. And now it was his. He grabbed his old phone, barely charged, covered in dust, and dialed a number he never thought he'd call again. Rachel, the vet who once called him reckless, brilliant, and impossible to forget, in that order. She picked up after the third ring, her voice still carrying the sharpness of someone who didn't suffer fools. When he told her what was happening, there was silence, then disbelief, then a sigh that said, "Only you, Aiden." But she didn't hang up. Instead, she walked him through the steps. A mix of honey and warm water. A dropper. Timing. Temperature. Faith. He followed every word like scripture, moving with a strange kind of reverence. He wasn't just trying to save a cub. He was salvaging a piece of himself long buried beneath regret and exile. The dropper trembled in his hand. One drop. Two. No reaction. Then a swallow. A faint shift in the cub's mouth. The smallest flicker of life, but enough to crack the ice in his chest. These emotional pet stories always look miraculous in hindsight. But in the moment, they're just sweat, tears, and that stubborn refusal to give up. Outside, the cold deepened. Shadows stretched across the snow like bruises. But inside the cabin, warmth bloomed from a heating pad, a half-spoken prayer, and a man rediscovering courage. Aiden wrapped the cub tighter, watching its tiny chest rise again, a little stronger this time. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He just stayed, because sometimes, dog rescue or bear rescue, it doesn't matter the species. What matters is presence, persistence, the willingness to answer a call that no one else hears. And just as he leaned back, a sigh caught in his throat. He glanced toward the window. The mother bear hadn't moved, but her eyes, they seemed to glint with something that felt like gratitude. Maybe he was imagining it. Or maybe, just maybe, the wild really does recognize its allies when it sees them. Whatever it was, Aiden knew this battle was far from over. The infection was growing, and help was still miles away. Aiden couldn't help but feel the weight of those eyes outside. The mother bear never moved from her place, nestled just beyond the tree line, her gaze fixed on the cabin like a shadow guarding the threshold between life and death. It was as if she knew exactly what he was doing inside, knew the tiny life hanging by a thread. And still she waited. No growls, no sign of aggression, just a quiet, steady presence like the earth itself was holding its breath. Sometimes, in the world of rescue animals, you encounter a bond so deep that no words are necessary. This was one of those times. Aiden watched the cub stir again, a tiny paw twitching under the warmth of the towels. His heart thudded in his chest. It wasn't much. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something. Hope wasn't a loud thing. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a small movement, a flicker of life where there should have been nothing. And for a man who had seen so much of the worst in the world, it was enough. Enough to keep him going. Enough to make him believe that sometimes the wild doesn't just take, it also gives in ways you'll never expect. Outside, the mother stayed unmoving. Aiden had heard the old stories, how animals could feel when something wasn't right, how they would fight for their young even in the face of impossible odds. But this felt different. It wasn't about fight or flight. It was about trust. A wild animal, a mother who had nothing to offer but her presence, and a man who had nothing to give but his word. In that quiet, Aiden realized something. We often forget that animals aren't just part of the wild. They're part of us, too. They feel, they think, they hope. And they teach us in the most unexpected of ways. As the day stretched on and the sun climbed higher, Aiden kept his vigil by the cub. He knew that each hour was precious, that every decision was a fragile thread in the fabric of life. But there was no panic in him, no rush, just a quiet dedication that echoed the trust of the mother outside. Maybe, just maybe, he thought this little cub was going to pull through. The hope that had flickered earlier seemed to solidify into something more real now. And still, the mother never left. The air in the cabin felt different now. More alive, maybe. Or maybe it was just Aiden, feeling the weight of this connection settle deeper into his bones. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the towels around the cub's body, but his mind was clear. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the past or his mistakes. He wasn't thinking about the way life had failed him. He was thinking only about the tiny life in his hands, and that, it seemed, was enough. At the back of his mind, a quiet whisper persisted. He was only one part of the story. The mother bear had been waiting. She had been watching. And though he couldn't see it, Aiden was certain. She hadn't given up either. It was a cold afternoon when Aiden first noticed the darkening patch beneath the cub's matted fur. At first, he thought it was just the exhaustion taking its toll on his mind. But as he gently parted the fur, he saw it. An infected wound, already festering and swollen. A deep bite mark. The infection was spreading quickly, and time was running out. The cub had survived the night, but this new threat was different. It wasn't just about feeding it or keeping it warm. This was a fight against something unseen, something insidious. The cub wasn't out of danger. Not by a long shot. Aiden's heart sank. He knew too well that infections in the wild could spread like wildfire. And while he was no expert in pet rescue, he had learned enough through life's many twists to know when something was beyond his capabilities. He needed help, and fast. Another call to Rachel. Another call to the world he had tried so hard to avoid. But it didn't matter. This wasn't about him. This was about the cub. About the promise he had made when he scooped it from the cold porch and brought it into the warmth of his cabin. Rachel didn't hesitate. She agreed to come, despite the fact that the roads were treacherous and it would take hours. Aiden watched the window as dusk fell. The last light of day filtered through the trees, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. It was a strange thing, that feeling. Like the woods themselves understood the stakes of the moment. No one else was coming to help. The only one standing between the cub and death was a reclusive man in a cabin, his hands trembling as he tried to keep a tiny life afloat. But then came the real test, the moment when everything could have fallen apart. Aiden knew he couldn't wait for Rachel forever. He had to act. So, he took a deep breath and did what he could. Carefully, he began the process of cleaning the wound, working with the same patience he'd used to comfort the cub earlier. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't perfect, but it was necessary. And in a world where animal miracles seemed like nothing more than stories told around campfires, Aiden was learning. Miracles were made by those willing to work in the trenches, even when the odds were stacked against them. As night began to settle in, Rachel finally arrived, bringing the antibiotics and the necessary supplies. Aiden had already done what he could, but now it was time to put everything he had learned to the test. He stepped back as Rachel administered the medicine, watching the cub's body relax for the first time in hours. Outside, the mother bear remained, her presence unwavering. Aiden wondered if she knew what they were doing for her child, if somehow she understood that they were all in this together. And as he looked at the cub, still weak, but breathing stronger now, Aiden couldn't help but believe in the impossible. He believed, for the first time in a long while, that survival was still possible. That hope wasn't a fleeting thing, but something you had to fight for. Weeks passed in a quiet blur. The days seemed to stretch on forever, but Aiden didn't mind. He kept his focus on the cub, who was growing stronger every day. The little bear's leg had healed, its eyes had brightened, and its energy had returned. It was still a bit wobbly on its feet, but there was no mistaking it. This cub, against all odds, had survived. And in that survival, something deeper had formed. A bond, not just between Aiden and the bear, but between two worlds that had, for a moment, seemed so distant. One morning, Aiden found himself standing at the threshold of the sanctuary. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The cub, now bigger and more agile, bounded toward him. Its limp was still noticeable, but the life in its eyes was undeniable. It was full of energy, full of life. Aiden's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief as the cub reached him. It nuzzled his hand, as though thanking him for the countless hours spent tending to it. It wasn't just about food and warmth anymore. It was about something deeper, something unspoken, something that told Aiden he had done more than just save a life. He had connected with it. He had been a part of its journey. As the cub circled around him, Aiden glanced over his shoulder. The sanctuary was quiet, but there, at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the fence, stood the mother bear. She was still and silent, just like the first time Aiden had seen her. She hadn't approached the sanctuary, but she was there, watching, waiting. It was almost as if she knew, as if she understood that this chapter the one where Aiden had become a part of her story, was now complete. She wasn't running away from the past. She wasn't abandoning her child. She was just there, a presence in the distance. And somehow that was enough. Aiden felt a lump form in his throat as he turned back to the cub, now frolicking around the enclosure with newfound vigor. The bond between them was clear. The cub had not only survived, it had thrived. And Aiden had played a role in that. But it wasn't just him. It was the trust of a mother, the resilience of the cub, and the determination of people like Rachel, who had made this all possible. It was a reminder that rescue animals, like this cub, often go through more than just physical challenges. They go through emotional journeys, too. And sometimes, those journeys change you in ways you can't fully explain. As Aiden watched the cub play, a sense of peace washed over him. The world outside the sanctuary seemed distant, irrelevant. There was no rush, no deadlines, no demands. There was only this moment. And in this moment, he knew something profound. The world didn't owe him understanding. It didn't need to. He had found his purpose in these quiet, life-changing moments. The cub's survival was a testament to that. But more than that, it was a reminder of the quiet, enduring power of connection between species, between lives, between hearts. And as the mother bear faded into the trees, Aiden realized something else. Some bonds, no matter how fleeting, last a lifetime. And sometimes, they're the most meaningful bonds you'll ever make.